Peppa Pig, the basement secret. For the past few weeks, Peppa had noticed strange things. Susie, Danny, Pedro, and Rebecca had stopped coming over to play. Whenever she asked about them, the adults would give vague answers. Even Mummy Pig seemed worried but avoided the topic. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, heavy footsteps and the creak of a door echoed through the house. Curiosity got the better of Peppa, and she carefully stepped out of her room. The hallway was dark, but a faint light was coming from downstairs. She crept down the stairs and saw that the basement door was slightly open. Inside, Daddy Pig stood with his back to her, rummaging through some boxes. In the far corner of the basement, there were cages. Inside them, dark figures barely moved. Her friends. They sat in silence, their eyes empty, as if they were unaware of what was happening. Peppa froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, but the floorboard beneath her let out a loud creak. Daddy Pig turned sharply. His face looked different, his eyes deeper and darker than usual. Slowly he moved toward her. Peppa spun around and ran upstairs. She had to tell Mummy. Bursting into her parents' bedroom, she saw that Mummy Pig was already sitting up in bed. She looked as if she had been expecting her. For a few moments they just stared at each other before Mummy Pig stood up, took Peppa's hoof, and led her out of the room. As they stepped into the hallway, Daddy Pig was already there. He didn't try to stop them. He just stood still, smiling. Suddenly the house went dark. The last thing Peppa heard was the creak of the basement door opening, and voices whispering her name from the darkness. A rush of cold air swept through the hallway, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something metallic. Peppa whimpered as Mummy Pig tightened her grip on her hoof. There was no hesitation in Mummy Pig's steps as she led Peppa toward the stairs. But instead of heading down, she turned toward the attic ladder. Mummy, Peppa whispered, her voice barely audible over the strange murmurs growing louder from below. Hush, darling, Mummy Pig whispered back, pulling the ladder down with a quiet snap. We don't have much time. Peppa hesitated, glancing back. Daddy Pig remained where he stood, his grin never faltering, his shadow stretching unnaturally long in the dim light. The voices from the basement grew clearer now, calling her name in distorted, overlapping tones. A sudden crash from below sent a jolt through Peppa's body. She didn't want to go into the attic. She wanted to run, to escape. But Mummy Pig was insistent, guiding her up the rickety ladder. The attic was dark and cold. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and old furniture loomed like silent ghosts. Mummy Pig shut the hatch behind them and crouched beside Peppa, her breath shaky. They know you saw them, she whispered. They won't let you go now. A loud thud rattled the ceiling below. Peppa clung to her mother, her little heart hammering in her chest. Then, in the silence, a single voice cut through. Peppa. It was Susie, right outside the attic door. Endless night. Peppa woke up in the middle of the night. She immediately felt that something was wrong. Usually, even at night, her room wasn't completely dark. Streetlights outside, the soft glow of the moon, the faint light from her night lamp. But now she was surrounded by absolute darkness. She blinked, trying to adjust to it. But nothing changed. The darkness was thick, like heavy smoke, like a black veil that had covered the entire house. Peppa slowly sat up in bed. A strange unease tightened in her chest. She reached out, found her night lamp, and flicked the switch. The light did not turn on. Peppa frowned. She swung her legs off the bed. The floor was cold, colder than usual. She walked to the window and cautiously pulled back the curtains. Her breath caught in her throat. Outside was endless, bottomless darkness. No moon, no stars, no distant glows from the neighbors' houses. Only black emptiness. Peppa pressed her face against the glass, straining her eyes to see anything. But the longer she looked, the more it seemed like the dark mass outside was moving. Like it was alive. A chill crawled up her spine. She turned and ran out of her room. The house was silent, too silent. She called for Mummy Pig, for Daddy Pig, for George. No answer. The door to her parents' bedroom was slightly open. Peppa froze in the hallway. She didn't want to go inside, but she had to. Taking a shaky breath, she pushed the door open. The beds were empty. The blankets were neatly tucked in, as if they had never been used. Peppa took a step back. This was not her house. It couldn't be. She ran downstairs to the front door. She grabbed the handle and pulled. Locked. She rushed to the living room window and pressed her face to the glass. The town was motionless. The streets were swallowed in thick blackness. The houses stood as silent shadows. Usually there would be lights in the windows, but now not a single house was glowing. Not a single sound. No footsteps, no distant hum of cars, no rustling wind. Only silence. Peppa stepped outside. The cold air pricked her skin. She walked down the road, glancing around. No one. She reached the town square where her friends usually played, but where the town should have been, there was now a vast, endless void. The ground abruptly ended, like the town had been erased, leaving only this black abyss behind. Peppa stepped back, her heart pounding, and then in the silence a sound echoed, a slow, heavy footstep. Peppa turned around. A figure stood in the middle of the empty street, tall, motionless, faceless, blending into the darkness. The figure did not move, but Peppa felt its gaze on her. She took a step back. The figure came closer. It didn't walk, it just was suddenly nearer. A deep fear settled in her chest. She turned and ran. But with every step, the road beneath her feet disappeared. The houses melted into the void. The town was vanishing, as if it had never existed. Peppa screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the darkness. She fell to her knees, looking around frantically. Nothing. Only emptiness. And then, breathing. Software. Cold. Right behind her. A whisper. Someone said her name. She spun around. The darkness collapsed. And then, nothing. The next morning, the town was gone. Not a single soul remained. Only endless night, and someone standing at its center. Someone who remembered how things used to be. But now, everything belonged to the darkness. Peppa Pig, the screen. It was a rainy evening at the Pig family home. Raindrops drummed against the windows and the wind howled through the pipes. Inside, the house was warm and cozy. Peppa and George sat on the floor playing with their toys, while Daddy Pig relaxed on the couch after a long day at work. The television flickered softly, filling the room with familiar sounds. Daddy lazily flipped through the channels, clicking the remote. But something was strange. The image on the screen trembled slightly, as if the TV couldn't focus. Sometimes the sound lagged behind, making the characters' mouths move out of sync. Daddy Pig frowned and tapped the remote against his palm. The screen flickered. At first, just a brief flash of static. Then the picture began to distort. The faces of the news anchors stretched unnaturally, their eyes turning empty, their voices muffled as if coming from deep underwater. Daddy Pig leaned closer, squinting at the screen. Suddenly, the television flared with a bright white light. A cold gust of air seemed to rush from it, and the room felt thick and heavy, as if something unseen was pulling everything toward the screen. The couch trembled slightly. Daddy Pig reached for the remote, but his fingers slipped. He tried to pull back, but something was dragging him forward. First, just a little, then with a sudden yank. Peppa and George froze, unable to move. They watched as Daddy Pig was pulled toward the screen. His feet lifted off the ground, his hands clawed at the armrests, his face twisted in terror. It all happened in seconds. The last thing they saw were his outstretched hands, disappearing into the flickering light. Then the TV glitched once more, and a dead silence filled the room. Peppa took a hesitant step forward. George clutched his dinosaur, his breathing shaky. The screen flickered again. And then, movement. A shadow shifted behind the static. A face, pale, distorted, with hollow eyes. It looked like Daddy Pig, but something was wrong. His lips trembled as if he was trying to speak. But instead of words, a low, muffled sound came through, the sound of heavy breathing. The screen flashed one last time before turning completely black. The house fell silent again. Only the rain continued to tap against the glass. Peppa slowly took a step back. The television showed nothing now, but Peppa could feel that it was still watching. Peppa Pig, the door to darkness. The day was gloomy and quiet. The wind rustled the trees outside, and the sky was covered with thick gray clouds. Peppa and George were playing in their room, building a tall tower out of blocks. The house felt especially cozy until it started to get dark. When Mummy Pig called them for dinner, Peppa stood up and accidentally knocked over the tower, sending the blocks tumbling to the floor. George whined in frustration, but Peppa wasn't paying attention anymore. She was staring at the corner of the room. There, where there had always been just a wall, now stood a door that had never been there before. It was tall, old, with a black handle. It looked out of place, as if it didn't belong in their house. Maybe Mummy and Daddy built a new storage closet, Peppa thought. But the idea sent a strange chill down her spine. George, forgetting about the fallen tower, also noticed the door and pressed himself against Peppa. Peppa took a step forward. The door was closed, but a cold draft seeped from the gap beneath it. She slowly reached out and touched the handle. It was freezing. And then the door creaked open slightly. Just a tiny bit, but it was enough. From the darkness inside came a soft rustling sound. Peppa and George froze, listening. No light, no voices. Just a faint scratching noise, like something in the shadows was dragging its claws across the floor. Peppa quickly pulled her hoof away. George gripped her dress tightly. And then the door started opening wider. Creak! The darkness behind it was too deep, unnatural, swallowing up all the light. Peppa instinctively stepped back. Then it appeared. Out of the blackness, a hoof slid into view. It looked like hers, but too long, with thin fingers instead of rounded edges. Then a second hoof emerged, and then a face peeked out. It was exactly like Peppa's, but its eyes were pitch black, empty, and its mouth— the mouth slowly stretched into an unnatural, wide grin. Peppa screamed and grabbed George's hoof. She bolted toward the hallway door. But then the light flickered. For a split second, everything was swallowed by total darkness. And when the light returned, the door was gone. All that remained was a blank wall, as if it had never existed. George whimpered, clutching Peppa's arm. She breathed heavily, eyes fixed on the spot where the door had been. Everything looked normal. But Peppa knew one thing for certain. It was still here. Somewhere. Watching.